and welcome to Security Analysis. I am Uday Bhaskar. The subject for our discussion this week is India's Ordnance Factory Board, what is called as the OFB, and a very major decision taken by the Modi government to corporatize the OFB. Very briefly explained, the Ordnance Factory Board of India is one of the oldest military organizations which goes back to colonial India, and it set up a network of factories for producing ammunition in the first instance, which is why it's called ordnance. Post-independence, now India has a network of 41 ordnance factories. And over the decades, there was a very clear assessment and determination that the output of the OFB collectively was not commensurate with what the Indian military needed, and there was a need for a rewiring. But this was a case of the can being kicked down the road, and a number of governments came, acknowledged that there was a need for change, but it did not happen. Earlier this year, in the middle of the year, the Modi government took this very bold decision and announced that they would corporatize the OFB. The idea was to encourage and give a fillip to Atmanirbhar India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is self-reliance. How successful will this be? What are the challenges ahead? And what is it that we should be focusing on? Will be the aim of this conversation today. And I'm very happy to introduce and welcome Major General Retired Rajan Kochhar. Welcome to the program, General Kochhar.
Thank you very much, sir.
General Kochhar retired from the Army Ordnance Corps. He's had extensive years of dealing with the OFB while in service. Subsequently, post-retirement, he was also associated with this attempt at revamping and rewiring. He's also been speaking on this issue to different national institutions, private sector, and is eminently qualified to talk about the OFB as we knew it, and what will be the new character once the corporatization takes the full path that has been outlined in the blueprint. So my request to you, General Kochhar, is in the first instance, why don't you please explain to our viewers, and all of them, by the way, or most of them are young India, Gen Next. Please explain to them what is the OFB and why was it necessary to undertake this particular bold, radical step that Prime Minister Modi and his cabinet have actually done. Over to you, General Kochhar.
Thank you, sir. At the very outset, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to you for inviting me to your show, and especially on this very pertinent and a topic which concerns the security of our nation. And the viewers need to know in-depth analysis on why this decision has been taken and what is the likely outcome of this decision. Before I start answering your question, sir, I would like to give a brief background of the OFB. Post-independence, the defense industry followed the Nehruvian philosophy on the lines of the Russian model, which treated defense sector as a strategic sector. So it was totally under the government control and no interference from the private sector. This continued for a good over 3 decades. And the initiation of the OFB started from the first ordnance factory which came up in Ishapur in the year 1801. It was under the British East India Company, and it was producing assault rifles. Then in the era from 1955 to 65, most of the ordnance factories came up. Most of these factories came up in areas which got dictated by political concerns rather than based on strategic or technological considerations. Even today, we are making the same mistakes by locating defense corridors in constituencies on political lines. Basically, the OFB was a large manufacturing hub for military hardware, indigenization, transfer of technology, and the maintenance of war wastage reserves capacity. It was a blend of the old and the new state of technology. For example, the new ordnance factory which came up in Nalanda, which is basically the ammunition and explosives, and Korwa, which is the weapons and equipment, are fairly modernized. Today, we have 41 ordnance factories and 32 other related establishments which cater for proofing, research and development, etc. Basically, the OFB functions on the indents which are placed by the armed forces for its war wastage and training requirements. Indent for ammunition are based on a 5-year roll-on plan based on our requirements for a 40 days intense war, which has been recently capped by the government to 20 days intense requirement. The vehicles, the spares, the armored tanks, the clothing are based on yearly indents on the basis of target fixation committees which hold a meeting every year. Why I am actually giving this background to you is that it will get related to the corporatization at a later stage as we discuss it along.
Let me hoist this, Rajan, as I've understood from what you have given a very detailed and lucid background. The OFB, 41 ordnance factories, 32 affiliates, it's almost 70 plus as establishments go. And if I remember right, the number of employees are about 76,000, thereabouts. So for them, the armed forces and the army particularly was a captive, shall we say, entity that had to acquire all its indented ordnance from the OFB. So I know from my reading and the experience that I have had as a security analyst and information based in the public domain, CAG reports, parliamentary committee observations, and various other inputs. I'm sure you would have been one of the officers who may have been involved in the Army's observations and reports to the MOD. I noticed two statistics, why there has been so much disappointment with the OFB over the last few decades. I'm reading out one particular observation in the public domain that in 2020, the Indian Army reported faulty OFB ammunition that resulted in 403 accidents over the previous 6 years, which led to the death of 27 soldiers and the loss of almost 960 crores. Now, there are various other such observations which are part of CAG, Army reports, MOD reports, etc. So my query to you is that the efficiency level also has been below par. Therefore, cost overruns. There is another item which said that even for clothing, the OFB and its affiliates had charged 3 times the market price and so on and so forth. So my question to you really is that with this background and the new model, the corporatization, that's a tough word, I always slip up on that, but the corporate identity, let's put it that way, profile of OFB, how do you see these inadequacies and these, problem areas? How will they be solved? Rajan?
Sir, a very intrusive reading you have given of this situation, because it is certainly a very, very challenging task to take on 41 entities translated into 7 major divisions, as they call it, and create a corporate culture. If you would have read the latest reports on the Standing Committee of Defense, the present OFB capacity is limited to orders worth 17,000 crores. But unfortunately, the OFB has only been getting orders not more than 1,200 crores. So the first aspect, when we talk about rise in the prices, is underutilization of the capacity of the OFB. That has a direct relation to the manpower employed, because there will be a number of people who would be sitting idle, but at the same time being paid, as at the same time that there are number of multifarious issues wherein these orders have been fluctuating on a yearly basis. So the planning of material can also not take place if you would realize the inventory carrying cost will actually go up in case you don't have for each year. Coming to the other issue of how these industries will get corporatized now, seeing the challenges, I will just draw your attention to a brief analysis which I have made of the 7 entities. And I'll explain to you that how exactly this challenge will manifest itself into a corporate sort of a situation. Let us start with Munitions India Limited. This is the name of the first entity which has been given by the government, which has to deal with ammunition and explosives. Now, this entity has to take care of 12 ordnance factories, which are spread over 7 states. So you can imagine these 12 entities, right from northern India to western India to eastern India and the southern India, are spread all over. And the ancillary support, the spares or the raw materials support, is coming from another entity which is known as Yantra India now. This entity again is consisting of 8 ordnance factories spread over 8 states, and there is no commonality in states as far as the Munition India is concerned and the Yantra India is concerned. So now the biggest challenge is you will have to take care of all these 7 entities like Munition India, Armed Vehicle Nigam Limited, Advanced Weapon and Equipment India Limited, Troops Comfort India Limited, India Optel Limited, and Gliders India Limited. These are the 6 entities along with the Yantra Limited. So it is the biggest challenge now. The first challenge is the command and control. How are you going to exercise the command and control of the entities which are located thousands of kilometers away?
Okay, 1 second. So let me just explain this again to our viewers. You're saying that this is the nature of the challenge because of the spread of the factories and the way the ancillary system is working. My query to you is that, as I understand in the new model, all 76,000 employees have been transferred to the corporate entities. The leadership is much the same. So when you have the same leadership, the same staff, the workers and the technical support, whatever is coming, how will they do any better? You know, when you say that this is the nature of the problem, how will having a corporate identity or a corporate character deal with this very complex problem that you have identified?
Sir, you have rightly brought out it's like a old wine in a new bottle, because the basic human resource has not changed. So what is to be changed now is the systems, the processes, the functioning of getting into a corporatization. So what is going to happen now is a different organizational culture will have to be created. Which
Will
is
have to be
based-
created. Okay, got it. A new organizational culture will have to be created. Got it. Okay.
Yes, it has to be done to bring in greater accountability and responsibility. They would now be open to competitions. Earlier, there was a captive customer, the Indian Army.
Okay.
They will now have to go in for a global tender. They would be subject to a mechanism of pricing delivery. Earlier, whatever price they told us, we accepted that price. But now it will not be the case. There will be an incentive for the people who actually perform. I was speaking to certain junior officers, scientists who are involved in the OFB or who are part of the OFB. Their biggest crib was, sir, even if we do well, or even if we produce a better result, there is no incentive. So there was absolutely no incentive earlier. And what another important aspect is KPMG, a corporate entity, it's sort of a consulting firm, has been co-opted in this entire process of corporatization. So, notwithstanding the old manpower being there, the leadership remains the same, but the decision making is going to change now, because the government is not going to control the decision making any longer. There'll be like PSUs, 7 different organizations having their own board of directors who will decide, and the decision is going to be much faster. KPMG will be there to assist them to modulate their processes into a corporate culture. So I feel that this model is a balanced model. I won't say that it is a very innovative kind of a model. It is a model where a safety mechanism has been built up, keeping the old people there, because there are actually issues with the trade unions, with the labor ministry. So the government didn't want to get into those issues. And therefore, I think we must give it at least 3 years' time in order to assess.
Rajan, there are 2-3 points you have identified which are very important, and I want to really take them forward. Number one, you are pinning, I would say, a lot of hope, if I may put it that way, on the change in the organizational culture. That in the previous decades, much of the problem, as you have identified, had to do with the organizational culture, and that the corporate identity would allow for a new culture to be hopefully introduced. The second is you spoke about incentives for the staff. That might be one more carrot. And you also made reference to the model of the defense public sector units. Now, I want to share my thoughts with you, having been a security analyst for almost 30 years and looked at the Indian DPSUs fairly closely, particularly those related to the maritime sector, that is shipbuilding. Now, one broad observation that most people are agreed is that when you look at an Indian defense PSU, it has been plagued by what we describe as the cost and time overrun. Meaning that if you look at a warship that is built in India, ton for ton, and compare it with a warship that has been built, say, in a shipbuilding yard, either in Japan or South Korea or China, I'm taking 3 well-known countries in Asia. The Indian cost and time overrun is almost double the time taken, meaning that if a ship is built in China or Japan or South Korea in 2 years, in India, it could take 4 to 5 years. Similarly, the cost, and this is actually related to the efficiency index productivity of the Indian defense public sector units. Now, what you are suggesting is that there would be a very radical change in productivity, in output, and this within the Indian context. We know from our own experience that whether we talk about Air India or any other public sector organization with its own culture and its political and bureaucratic character, making very rapid and positive progress has been an uphill task. So you feel कि corporate sector में हो सकता है, the new identity of the OFB. तो आपको लगता है साहब कि ये हो जाएगा या अगले 3-4 साल में? क्या लगता है आपको?
Sir, I'll just like to elaborate on a few issues which you talked about, the cost overruns and the time overruns. Because being in the Indian Army and being actually associated and interacting with the OFB on the issues of quality, delays, etc., we have to draw one important reference that earlier we used to be placing indents. We used to be never entering into a contract. Now, with the corporatization, the indents have become history. We have to place a supply order, which is a contract. And that contract is bound by certain terms and conditions. So, the problem of time and cost overruns, I'm quite hopeful will get to some extent addressed by this change of the procurement procedure. Second example, I just want to relate to whatever you have just said in the form of a case study. I have done a small case study on one of the entities, which is the Advanced Weapons and Equipment India Limited, or you can call it the Weapons and India Group. This company has an existing turnover of 1,500 crores, and it produces carbines, medium caliber guns, rocket launchers, rifles, pistols, barrels, revolvers, and the LMG and the medium machine gun. It has a force strength of 17,000 employees, and it is located in 8 divisions: Jabalpur, Ishapur, Kanpur, Kasipur, Damdam, and Korwa. So it is evident here the biggest challenge for the corporatization is going to be the supply chain management, which people are not talking about at all. Because I will give you an example, sir. In COVID times, how many companies have collapsed because of supply chain management? A recent study brought out that almost 40% of the medium and small scale industries collapsed because they didn't have a supply chain in place, a contingency plan in place. Now, if we relate it to this entity which I'm talking about, supply chain is going to be a major concern. The second aspect is we must never view the defense industry in isolation. We must also view it with the industrialization which is taking place in our entire country. So, comparing with China and Japan, I feel would not be a very realistic thing, because the manufacturing sector of India only contributes 23% of our GDP.
No, very
As
true.
it is
I
the
agree on all these points, Rajan. All I'm trying to say is that, we know the nature of the problem that has to be addressed. And I think you made a very important point in your opening remarks when you said, if you look at the Indian experience, while Prime Minister Modi has been very committed to Atmanirbhar Bharat, particularly in defense, He said this in his first term. He repeated it in his second term. But what is the reality that we have seen? As you pointed out, if India has invested in defense corridors, the consideration for locating these corridors was more political. For instance, we had one corridor in Tamil Nadu, which was a new corridor. Then we had a new corridor now in UP. UP is being projected as a very major area for Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense, which is a challenge because so far it's not been a success story. Now, I want to ask you towards the end of our conversation about the nature of the way ahead. And आपने जो अभी बताया राजन साहब, ये बहुत सही है कि if you talk about India's first rifle factory, हम बात कर रहे हैं 1801, 3 शताब्दी पहले की बात है. उसके बाद आजादी हो गया है. We are now moving towards India at 75. But the reality is that between independent India after 1947, we have not been able to design a successful personal weapon. आप तो ये सब जानते हैं. We know the INSAS experience.
Absolutely,
so 75 years after independence, India is still relying on an imported design, चाहे वो Kalashnikov हो या कहीं और का rifle. So my simple query to you is, जहां तक मोदी साहब बार बार कहते हैं आत्मनिर्भर भारत, if the OFB does not invest in design, मान लीजिए corporate बन गया है, you go for global tender, but if you don't have your own design, you will still be in the mode of manufacturing a foreign product or assembling a foreign product. So that goes against the ethos of Atmanirbhar. So how will that be addressed? Rajan?
So you're absolutely right. The OFB data actually suggests that only 0.5% of its budget is spent on research and development. So when you have such a pittance actually allocated to your research and development, you won't actually get any technology in the country. You will have to get it from outside. The second aspect is that with the corporatization, a lot of impetus will have to be given to research and development, because you will have to get those designs within your own country. There has to be a transfer of technology. From where the money will come? Because as it is, and I will just give you a rundown, sir, on the strategic insights into this corporatization, and you will realize that these industries do not have the type of budget available for research and development. So the government seems to be quiet on it, because the government needs to allocate for at least a period of 5 years, I would say, a substantial portion of funds for research and development in case we want corporatization to succeed. Because in case it doesn't happen, it will be the same old thing.
Correct.
Atmanirbhar Bharat will continue to be only in and not in any kind of action on the ground, because what is going to actually happen now is there is already a reduced demand from the services. I was interacting with the Vice Chief of the Army, and what figures I got from Army headquarters actually suggest that it's only about 11,000 crores worth of money which the Army is willing to give it to these 7 entities. So their capacities are 17,000, but they're only going to get 11,000. So from where the profit building will come, and one of the goals of the Army is the price reduction. This price reduction, sir, unfortunately is not going to happen, because when the demand is going to be reduced, your costs will actually go up, your workforce is not going to be retrenched, you are keeping the same people in the same sort of positions. So you are bound to have an increase of the prices, and it will also affect the turnover of the companies. So the second most important factor is the survival of the artillery group, sir. For example, I will give you an example, sir. The Dhanush guns, sir. We have placed an order for 114 guns on the OFB, sir. This order was placed in April 2017, and so far, against a planned output of manufacturing the 48 guns per year, OFB has so far manufactured and handed over to the army only 12 guns, which not only which will actually not make up even a regiment of the artillery.
Correct, correct.
So in case they are going to go at this pace of their manufacture, I don't see much hope as far as this survival of the entities are concerned. So the second most important aspect is about the clothing, sir. OFB has not been able to manufacture extreme cold clothing for the altitudes of 18,000 above feet, sir. And more than 200 items of clothing have been outsourced by the government now. So this ancillary group, as we are talking about, is going to shut shop, sir, because it won't have any orders available for it to actually sustain the manpower and the budget it has been given, sir.
Rajan, I think these are again very, very important areas. I'm sorry that I'm interrupting you, but I just thought I would add 2 bits of information that are in the public domain that point to the nature of the problem and the track record of the OFB. Since you spoke about uniforms, I'm reading something from the public domain. Quote, the army found that the ordnance factories were supplying combat uniforms to troops 3 times more expensive than those available in the open market. And they also added that they were not up to the necessary level, the quality that they were looking for. So this is a very serious omission. The other, which I thought was even more serious, is related to the Dhanush guns that you have just referred to. And this is where I'm always saying that when it comes to India's military preparedness, we should not get into the trap of believing our own slogans and the make-believe. Because one of the investigative agencies found, and I'm reading from a report, that the 6 Dhanush guns that had been handed over to the army in 2019, with a lot of media blitz about Make in India, they were fitted with Chinese bearings and not the German one as agreed to earlier. And further, that these bearings did not pass the quality test of the gun carriage factory, but these were still handed over to the army, unquote. Now, I'm sure you know all this. So all I'm saying is that India today has a very serious problem and a challenge when it comes to acquiring credible self-reliance, Atmanirbharta in the defense sector. And the inability to produce a personal weapon is one such example. But I want to give you the last word and say that we are hopeful that we should give the system this changed corporate profile of the OFB 3 to 4 years. And I want to share your optimism that there will be a change in the organizational culture of the new entities and that they would also invest in R&D. One hopes that all this will happen. But I want to thank you, General Kochhar, for sharing your views. And I hope that we'll be able to invite you back after a year or 2 to do stock taking and to see whether or not the army is no longer a captive client and gets a better quality, so that if nothing, our soldiers don't die because of faulty ammunition, which I think is a very tragic issue. But on that note, I want to thank General Kochhar for shedding light on a very important subject. And I want to thank all of you for watching Security Analysis. We'll be back again next week with another subject. Jai Hind.